The first ember Eliza Ward woke with a strange feeling. It was early, just before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, but the room felt hot. Too hot. She coughed, her throat dry. Then came the smell, thick, heavy smoke. Her heart raced. She sat up fast in her small bed and looked around. Her younger brother, Thomas, was still asleep on the straw mattress next to hers, his face calm, unaware of the danger building around them. "Eliza," he mumbled, still half dreaming. "Get up," she whispered, grabbing his hand. Now, suddenly, a loud crack echoed from below. It sounded like wood breaking, like something heavy falling. The air inside the room shimmered with heat. She rushed to the tiny window and looked out onto Pudding Lane. What she saw made her gasp. Flames. Huge dancing flames were climbing the bakery across the street. The building next door was already burning. People screamed, horses neighed in, panic, and smoke billowed into the sky. The Great Fire of London had begun. Her house, made of wood and tar like the rest, stood no chance. It was only a matter of minutes before the fire reached them. She shook Thomas harder. "We have to go." He was only 7, small for his age, with big brown eyes that looked even bigger in fear. "Where's Papa?" he asked. "I don't know," Eliza said, voice shaking. "He went to work at the docks. We have to find him." They hurried down the stairs, but halfway down, Eliza froze. The door, their only exit, was glowing orange from the outside. Smoke pushed in from the cracks. The fire was already there. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked around. There had to be another way. The back window. It was small, barely big enough, but it was something. "Come," she told Thomas, grabbing his hand again. She led him to the kitchen where a tiny window faced the alley. Eliza climbed onto the counter and tried to open it, but it was stuck. She kicked it with her foot, once, twice, and it burst open, the glass shattering. "Go," she screamed. "I'll help you." Thomas was crying now, but he obeyed. She pushed him through the narrow gap, ignoring the sharp edges cutting her arms. Once he was out, Eliza tried to follow, but her skirt got stuck. Smoke filled her lungs. She felt the heat behind her grow stronger. With a loud scream, she tore herself free. Falling onto the cobblestone alley, they lay there, coughing and gasping for air. Behind them, their house collapsed in flames. Their home was gone. Eliza didn't cry. She didn't have time. "We have to find Papa," she said, pulling Thomas to his feet. They stumbled through the narrow streets of London, now filled with chaos. People were running, shouting, carrying whatever they could save. Some had bags, others held crying children. Some dragged carts filled with furniture, while others clutched only a Bible or a blanket. The sky turned black with smoke. Ash fell, like snow. "Don't let go of my hand," Elisa told Thomas. They passed a woman screaming for her cat, an old man trying to carry his sick wife, and a priest shouting prayers into the wind. At every corner the fire seemed to grow. It leaped from rooftop to rooftop, licking the sky like a monster with no end. Buckets of water were useless. The wooden homes were too close together, the wind too strong. Eliza led Thomas toward the river. She hoped to find boats or soldiers, anyone who could help. But the docks were full of frightened people. Many had already boarded ships, while others begged for space. "Have you seen a man named Henry Ward?" Eliza asked a soldier. The man shook his head. "There are too many. People keep moving, girl." She didn't stop, not even when the wind blew ash into her eyes, or when her legs felt like they would give out. She had to find her father. She had to protect her brother. As they reached the old stone church near Thames Street, a loud crash echoed. A nearby shop exploded in flame, sending shards of glass and wood into the air. Thomas screamed and ducked. Eliza threw herself over him, shielding his tiny body with her own. When the noise settled, she looked up. A group of men were helping others escape. One of them looked familiar. She shouted. The man turned. It was her father, covered in soot, his face pale with shock. "Eliza," he whispered. "Thomas." They ran into his arms, and for the first time that day, Eliza let herself cry. They didn't have long. The fire was coming fast. Henry Ward held his children close, then pulled them away. "We have to get to the boats. There's no time." Together, they ran back toward the river. By now, hundreds of people had gathered. Soldiers tried to maintain order, but fear was stronger. People pushed, shoved, screamed. Eliza clutched Thomas tightly as they were lifted onto a small ferryboat. Her father climbed in after them, just as another flame leapt over the rooftops nearby. The boat pulled away. The city behind them glowed red, like a world on fire. Eliza looked back as they floated down the Thames. Her neighborhood, her school, her home, her favorite bakery was gone, but her family was alive. And in that moment, as fire lit the night, she promised herself something. She would never forget this day, and she would grow strong. Strong enough to help others like she had helped her brother. Strong enough to rebuild, not just for herself but for everyone who had lost something in the flames. This was the day she changed. The fire had taken everything, but it had not taken her courage. Ashes on the river carried them away from the fire, but not from the fear. As the ferry glided over the dark, choppy waters of the Thames, Eliza clutched Thomas tighter, her soot-covered fingers shaking. Behind them, London burned, orange, flames rose high into the sky. swallowing buildings, shops, and dreams. It looked like the end of the world, but it was only the beginning. The boat was packed with people, crying mothers, coughing children, old men whispering prayers. Beside them sat a boy with singed hair and no shoes. He hadn't said a word since boarding. A woman nearby held a cage with a silent bird, its feathers gray with ash. No one spoke. The only sounds were sobs, the slap of water, and the roar of fire behind them. Henry Ward, their father, wrapped his arms around Eliza and Thomas. He didn't cry, but his eyes looked empty, lost in some distant place. "Where are we going?" Eliza finally asked. Henry hesitated. "South," he said, "to a village called Blackfriars. There's a merchant friend there. We'll be safe." Eliza didn't know what safe meant anymore. They floated past churches with collapsing spires, warehouses with charred roofs, and grand halls now no more than flame and timber. The sky had turned an eerie red, and the air smelled of smoke, sweat, and despair. When they finally reached the banks of Blackfriars, soldiers helped them off the boat. It was quieter here, but not peaceful. Refugees filled every corner of the village, in the fields, the barns, even the cemetery. Some had blankets. Others just lay on the cold grass. Strangers shared food, water, and quiet tears. Henry led his children to the far side of the field. A kind old woman gave them bread and a water jug. Eliza tore off a piece and fed it to Thomas, who hadn't spoken since they escaped. That night, they slept on the ground beneath a cot. The stars above them twinkled like nothing had changed. But Eliza knew better. 3 days later, the fire still raged. News came in whispers. St. Paul's Cathedral had collapsed. The tower was being protected by soldiers. Thousands were now homeless, and food was running low. Eliza stood by the river every morning watching the smoke rise. She felt something deep inside her, a mix of anger and determination. She wanted to help. She couldn't just sit and wait. That afternoon she found a group of women boiling water in large pots near the church ruins. One of them noticed her. "You look strong, girl," the woman said. "You want to help?" Eliza nodded without a word. For the next few hours she hauled water, washed burned wounds, and passed bread to hungry children. Her arms ached, her feet blistered, but she didn't stop. She learned names, she learned stories. There was Jonas, who had saved his baby sister by carrying her across a rooftop. There was Mrs. Cartwright, a blind widow who had walked 5 miles with a stick and a prayer. There was Maggie, a girl Eliza's age who hadn't spoken since her parents were trapped. Inside their bakery. By sunset, Eliza's dress was soaked with sweat and ash. But when she looked around and saw people smiling even just a little, she knew it was worth it. She was not helpless. A quiet conversation that night. Henry sat beside her, watching Thomas sleep. "I saw you today," he said quietly, helping Eliza. Nodded. "I don't want to feel useless, Papa." Henry placed a hand on her shoulder. "You remind me of your mother." Eliza's eyes filled. Her mother had died 2 winters ago from fever. She remembered her smile, her strength, how she could make even a cold, hungry night feel warm. "Your mother believed in helping those who had less," he said, "even when we had little ourselves. I just don't want to forget." Eliza whispered, "I don't want anyone to be forgotten." Henry looked at her for a long time. "Then you must keep going, Eliza, even when the fire's gone." The fire reaches the heart. 2 days later, they learned the fire was nearing Newgate Prison. If it spread there, the prisoners would burn, hundreds of them. The city's leaders were arguing, save the buildings or save the people. Eliza overheard it while carrying blankets to the sick tent. Her heart ached. She didn't know who the prisoners were. Some might be thieves, some worse, but they were still people. That night, while others rested, Eliza made a decision. She slipped away quietly and ran toward the bridge. A group of older boys followed her. Jonas, a stable hand named Liam, and silent Maggie. "You're mad," Liam said. "They'll throw you in." "I'm not going to fight," Eliza said. "I'm going to carry water." And that's what they did. The 4 of them formed a chain with buckets, hauling water toward the crumbling prison walls. Soldiers shouted at them, but they didn't stop. When the flames licked the roof, they poured water down. They tore blankets into strips and soaked them, pressing them against the hot stones. Others joined them, a baker, a priest, a one-legged veteran. Together they fought the fire, not with strength but with courage. By morning, the prison still stood, and the prisoners, forgotten and afraid, were still alive. The mayor's visit word spread quickly about the children who helped save Newgate. The mayor himself came to the refugee camp and asked for their names. Eliza didn't care about the praise. She only asked for something else. More food for the orphans, more water barrels, and a tent for the sick. "You're just a child," the mayor said. Eliza looked him in the eyes. So were the ones who carried the buckets. He nodded slowly. "Very well." Eliza's promise. That evening, as they sat by a small fire made from broken cots, Henry pulled Eliza close. "You did something important," he said. Eliza didn't answer right away. She stared at the stars again, the same stars that had looked down on their burned home. "I just want to help people feel like they matter," she finally whispered, "even when the world forgets them." Henry's eyes glistened. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The ash in their bread, the flames in London, had finally begun to die. But for Eliza Ward, the real fire had only just started inside the people. It smoldered quietly behind tired eyes and burned in the hollow spaces where families used to be. Every tent in the Blackfriars field had its own heartbreak, and Eliza was learning how heavy other people's pain could feel. She had become known around the camp as the girl who helped save the prison, but she didn't care for titles. What mattered more was that Maggie had finally spoken. Jonas had started laughing again, and even Thomas was learning to smile. For a while it felt like things might begin to heal. Until the bread went missing. The first accusation had started one morning when the crates of flour donated by the nearby village vanished. They were gone without a trace, just empty barrels where food should have been. People panicked. Bread was the only warm meal most had. The soldiers guarding the storehouse swore no one got past them. Then a woman, pale and thin, with shaking hands and cruel eyes, pointed her finger at Eliza's new friend. "That boy," she shrieked. "The one with the soot on his face. The orphan. I saw him sneaking around last night." Eliza's heart froze. Jonas had worked beside her for days. He had a kind soul. He even gave part of his blanket to a coughing baby. "The night before it wasn't him," Eliza said quickly, stepping forward, but the crowd was already turning. "Look at him, he's a street boy," someone muttered. "Probably used to stealing before the fire," said another. Jonas didn't speak. He just stood still, arms limp at his sides, staring at the ground like he'd already accepted whatever punishment they gave him. Elisa wasn't going to let that happen. The search for truth at night. Eliza stayed awake. She sat beside Jonas, in silence for hours, until he finally whispered, "I didn't do it." "I know," she said. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "They'll believe what they want." But Eliza refused to believe that. If the fire had taught her anything, it was this. Sometimes you had to fight for truth, even when it seemed small and invisible. The next morning, while most were lining up for food rations, Eliza slipped toward the supply tents. The soldiers guarding them had changed shifts. She moved quietly, unnoticed, until she found a trail, a line of flour, barely there, leading toward the far edge of the camp. Near the river. She followed it. Behind an abandoned cart half covered in blankets, she found something. Sacks of flour, 6 of them, hidden beneath hay in a soldier's coat, and standing beside them, laughing softly to himself, was Sergeant Bramley, one of the guards. Her stomach twisted. Bramley was a man people trusted. He passed out bread with a smile, carried injured children in his arms. But here he was, stealing what little the poor had left. Eliza didn't run. She stood her ground. "I knew someone was clever," he said, turning to her with a smirk. "But I didn't think it would be a girl." "Why?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling. Bramley shrugged. "You give poor people too much, they get soft. This food's worth silver in the next town, and no one would believe I took it." "Who would you believe, a soldier or a hungry child?" Eliza didn't respond. She just turned around and ran, speaking out within an hour. Half the camp was gathered again, just like the morning before. Eliza dragged the flour sacks behind her, bruises on her arms, hair wild in the wind. Thomas ran beside her, holding the soldier's coat as proof. Bramley followed, furious and red-faced. "She's lying," he shouted. "She wants to save her friend, that's all." What the people were listening to Eliza now. "She found the flour," said the old priest who'd seen Eliza helping every day. "She never lies." Jonas stepped forward. His voice cracked, but it was strong. "I didn't take anything. I just wanted bread like everyone else." Bramley's eyes darted. The crowd pressed closer. And then, from behind them, came the mayor, the same man who once doubted her. He stepped forward, took the coat, and inspected the sacks. After a long silence, he said, "Take the soldier. He's no longer one of us." Bramley tried to flee, but he was caught. This time justice wasn't blind. The weight of ash. Later that night, Eliza sat by the fire again, her hands wrapped around a small warm roll of bread. She tore it in half and gave the larger piece to Jonas. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank truth." He looked at her and smiled. "You're stronger than most grown-ups." Eliza didn't answer. Instead, she looked up at the stars. Her city was still ruined. Her mother was still gone. Their house was ash, but she had learned something even the fire couldn't burn. When you speak for those who can't, you become something bigger than yourself. And when people listen, that's how hope begins again. Letters and the smoke days passed since the arrest of Sergeant Bramley, but the fire he left behind still lingered, not in wood or coal, but in the hearts of the people. Trust was fragile in the Blackfriars camp now. Hunger, fear, and grief hung in the air like a fog. Eliza Ward, only 12 years old, had become a quiet leader, though she never asked to be one. She woke early, before the others, to boil water and bring bread to the sick tent. Her hands had grown rough, her clothes always stained, her voice a little hoarse, but her heart had never felt more alive. And yet, something was missing. That morning, as she handed out crusts of bread to the children, she noticed her father wasn't at the fire. He always sat there polishing his boots or tending to Thomas. But today, his coat was folded neatly on a wooden crate. His shoes were gone. Her throat tightened. "Have you seen my father?" she asked the old baker. Man shook his head. "Not since last night." she asked the women boiling porridge. The priest. The stable hand. No one had seen him. The note as panic rose in her chest. Eliza returned to their tent. Thomas was still asleep, curled under a scratchy wool blanket. She sat beside him trying to think. That's when she noticed it, a folded scrap of parchment tucked inside her father's jacket pocket. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Eliza, there's work on the East Docks, they say. The city will rebuild. I have to go. We've lost too much. Take care of Thomas. I'll return before the frost. Papa. Eliza stared at the words, unable to blink. The fire outside the tent crackled quietly. The sounds of the camp went dull, like someone had stuffed her ears with cotton. He was gone. No goodbye, no warning. He'd left her alone with Thomas. Again she wanted to scream. Instead, she folded the note and tucked it against her chest. Then she looked at her sleeping brother. I'll take care of you, she whispered, even if he doesn't come back. The visitor that same afternoon, as she was stirring broth for the elderly, a shadow fell across the fire. A tall figure stood there, wrapped in a cloak too fine for this place. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his boots were polished, and his shoulders straight like a man used to giving orders. Eliza Ward, he asked. She stiffened. Who's asking? The man removed his hat. He had a weathered face, grey in his beard, but his eyes were sharp and kind. My name is Sir Edward Langdon. I serve under the King's commission to assist in the rebuilding of London. I've heard of you. From who? She asked, suspicious. He smiled gently. From people you've helped. The prison guards, the mayor, even an old widow who says you saved her from freezing. Eliza said nothing. She didn't like being talked about. She liked doing things, not being praised for them. Sir Edward reached into his coat and pulled out a scroll. We're gathering names, he said. Brave ones, people who helped when others froze. The city needs messengers, cleaners, organizers, runners, even children, those who know the streets and know how to lead. I'm not a leader, she said. He crouched beside her. That's exactly what a real one would say. A hard decision that night. Eliza sat beside Thomas again. He was awake now, looking at the stars through a tear in the tent cloth. Where's Papa? He asked. Eliza lied gently. He's gone to build our new house. He'll come back before it snows. Thomas nodded, comforted. Will we have a chimney? A big one, she said, stroking his hair, with warm bread baking underneath. But in her own heart, she didn't believe it. She had no idea if their father would return. Later, she sat beside the fire and reread the scroll Sir Edward had left. Opportunity for service in the rebuilding of London. Duties messenger, supply carrier, aid to the wounded, rewards food, training, and royal commendation. It was everything she needed and everything that scared her. If she accepted, she'd leave Thomas in the care of the refugee tent mothers. She'd be helping others, yes, but abandoning her brother just like their father had. She had until morning to decide. The dream that night. She dreamed of her mother for the first time in months. They were back in the kitchen on Pudding Lane. Her mother was baking bread, her hands soft and warm. Eliza, she said, turning. What do we do when the world falls apart? We bake, young Eliza answered. No, her mother said with a smile. We build even from ashes, the choice. The next morning, Eliza kissed Thomas's forehead. Then she gathered her things, a sling bag, a crust of bread, a spare ribbon. From her mother's drawer she handed Thomas to the kindest woman she knew, a nurse named Agnes, who had 5 children of her own. All right, Eliza said. Every week you promise to read to him. Agnes nodded. And keep him fed, he'll be waiting for you. As Eliza walked toward the cart where Sir Edward stood, her heart pounded. The camp looked smaller now, less like a prison and more like a place she'd grown from. Sir Edward helped her into the cart. Are you sure? He asked. Eliza nodded. I'm ready. And so, at 12 years old, with soot on her dress and strength in her soul, Eliza left behind the only world she knew to help build a new one from its own smoke. Beneath the broken stones, the cart rattled as it rolled over cracked cobblestones and past charred ruins. Eliza sat silently beside 2 other children, both older, both staring at the ground like they were trying not to remember what they'd lost. Around them, the smell of scorched wood still clung to the air, mixed with something older, deeper. It was the scent of a wounded city as they entered the heart of London. Eliza saw what the fire had truly done. Rows of buildings stood like skeletons, hollow-eyed and blackened. Stone churches had collapsed into heaps of ash. Horse carts weaved slowly through piles of rubble. Every corner whispered of a life once lived, a market stall, a bakery sign, the remnants of a child's toy. Sir Edward pulled the cart to a stop beside a stone wall that had somehow survived the blaze. On the other side, a recovery camp had been built. Tents lined the street. Men and women moved like shadows, tired, burned, but moving. Always moving, Eliza, he said, dismounting. Welcome to the Rebuilders' Quarter. A city of silence. The days that followed were unlike anything she had known. Every morning at sunrise, she was handed a slate board and chalk, then sent 2 record names, the names of the lost, the missing, the ones who had not escaped. Elisa walked through ruins, pausing at doorways, speaking with survivors who lived here. She would ask gently what was their name. Sometimes people answered, the Coopers, 3 boys, gone. Other times, only silence. A broken teacup. A burnt Bible. She wrote it all. In the evenings, she helped serve stew from iron pots. She read letters aloud to the elderly who had gone blind. She helped wash the feet of children who hadn't worn shoes since the fire. And always, she watched the city try slowly, painfully to remember how to breathe. One night, she stood atop the old Guildhall steps, watching the sun sink behind the ruins. Her hands were black with soot, her heart heavy. "How do we fix this?" she whispered. Behind her, an old man answered, "One brick, one name, one kindness at a time." A voice from the past in her 5th day in the rebuilders' quarter. Eliza was assigned to carry food supplies to the crypt beneath St. Giles, a shelter now for those too sick to climb stairs. It was dark down there, damp, cold, as she carried baskets down the narrow stone steps. Her torch flickered. Shadows danced across the moss-covered walls. Dozens of makeshift beds lined the floor, some occupied by coughing elders, others by children too weak to sit. She knelt beside a woman whose hands were bandaged and swollen. Eliza offered her broth and wiped her mouth. "You have kind hands," the woman said. "What's your name?" "Eliza Ward," she replied softly. The woman froze. "Ward? From Pudding Lane." Eliza's breath caught. "Yes, why?" The woman trembled, tears springing to her eyes. "Your mother, Anna Ward. She was my friend. She gave me bread when I had nothing." Eliza couldn't speak, she said. "You would grow up strong." She said the world wouldn't forget you. Elisa knelt beside the woman for a long time, her hand in hers. She didn't cry. She couldn't, but inside her, something long buried bloomed again, the memory of her mother's voice, her gentle laughter, her warmth even in cold seasons. The secret tunnel later that week, Eliza was sent to help clear the old merchant quarter, where cellars had collapsed and threatened to bury anyone nearby. She worked beside a group of bricklayers hauling debris one stone at a time. That's when she found it. A narrow tunnel nearly hidden beneath a fallen beam leading under the ground. "Leave it," said one of the workers. "Too dangerous." But Elisa had learned something in the camp. The most dangerous paths sometimes led to the most important truths. She returned at night with a lantern and her slateboard. The tunnel was tight and dark. Rats scattered ahead of her. The air was thick and foul, but she crawled forward. After what felt like forever, she emerged into a hidden chamber. Shelves lined the walls, scrolls, boxes, ledgers, and in the middle, a wooden chest. Inside the chest, wrapped in wax cloth, were letters. Dozens of them. Royal letters, she gasped. They were sealed documents, names of those granted land, gold, pardons, most dated just before the fire. Some names had been crossed out, some had red marks, warnings, and on one scroll a name leapt out, Henry Ward under suspicion, subject to be watched. Eliza's mouth went dry. Her father. Why would her father's name be here? She gathered what she could, slipped the letters into her satchel, and fled the tunnel. Heart pounding. The truth burns too. Back at the tent, Eliza sat for hours, staring at the scroll by lantern light. Henry Ward, her father. Had he stolen something? But part of something. Was that why he left? She remembered the way he held Thomas, the way he fought to save them from fire. But this was something else. She couldn't ask him. He was gone. She had to decide. Expose what she found or protect what she believed. Sir Edward entered just before dawn. He saw the letters, read them silently. "This was a secret vault," he said, "only known to the guildmasters. These names, they matter." Eliza nodded slowly. "My father's name is there, I see. Does it mean he was bad?" Sir Edward knelt beside her. "Sometimes, good people get caught in the fire. Doesn't mean they lit the match." The girl who knew too much. The scrolls sat heavy in Eliza's satchel, but heavier still was the truth. She now carried her father's name marked by suspicion. Hidden among royal records meant never to be found. The fire had burned buildings and bodies, but this was the fire that burned trust. Sir Edward had not spoken much after reading the scrolls. Only once did he place a firm hand on her shoulder and say, "What you do with this truth will change more than you know." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the canvas of the tent, her mind racing. Her father, the same man who had protected her, and Thomas with bleeding hands, had been watched by the crown. Was he a criminal, or just a man trying to survive in a city where justice wasn't blind, just blindfolded by the rich? And what about her mother? Had she known? Was that why she always seemed afraid of men in uniforms? Eliza turned her face into her blanket and cried silently, letting the grief bleed from her like ink on parchment. A whisper in the fog. The next morning, Eliza was sent with a small group to deliver medicine to the wounded in the northern ruins. Sir Edward warned her to keep the scrolls hidden. "There are men," he said, "who would burn every survivor alive to make sure those names never leave the ground." Eliza nodded. She was no longer just a girl from Pudding Lane. She was a messenger of something dangerous. As she walked through the ruins with her bag slung over her shoulder, she noticed something odd. The usual crowds were gone. The once busy street near the old leather market was empty, silent. Then she heard it, a whisper. "Eliza." She turned. No one. Then again, Eliza Ward, girl of fire. From the shadows stepped a man in black. His clothes were clean to clean, his boots polished, his eyes sharp and cruel. He smiled. My name is Captain Silas Green, he said. I've come for what you found. Eliza didn't flinch. I don't know what you mean. Oh, but you do, he said, stepping closer. The scrolls, the records, names the king would rather not see again. How do you know my name? She asked. He smirked. Because we watched your father long before the fire. And we're watching you now. Eliza's hands trembled inside her cloak, but her voice stayed strong. You watched him burn, she said. He blinked. No, we watched him run. And we're curious what a little girl like you plans to do with such dangerous truth. The escape before Captain Green could move. A sharp whistle cut through the air. From behind the rubble came Jonas, her old friend from the camp, now stronger, taller, and holding a brick in one hand. Eliza, run. She didn't think. She bolted down the alley. Jonas right behind her. Captain Green shouted. But they knew the streets better. They darted through collapsed shops, climbed walls like thieves, slipped under wagons. When they reached the old mill tower, they stopped to breathe. Eliza doubled over, coughing. Jonas looked at her. What was that about? She pulled the scroll from her coat and handed it to him. His eyes widened. This is royal. Eliza nodded. And dangerous. Jonas handed it back. Then, why are you still holding it? Because if I burn it, she said, the truth dies with it. And I refuse to let lies win just because they're louder. The secret council that evening, under cover of darkness, Sir Edward summoned Eliza to a hidden chamber beneath the Guildhall, a place where a handful of trusted figures met to plan the future of the city. Eliza stood before them, dusty, tired, and just 12 years old, clutching scrolls that could shatter lives. Sir Edward spoke. This child has uncovered documents that prove many were framed before the fire, some for land, others for gold. If these are true, it means the fire did more than burn homes. It covered corruption. A councilwoman stepped forward. And the girl, what does she want? Eliza took a deep breath. I want my father's name cleared. I want the poor to stop being blamed for things they never touched. I want truth, even if it scares people. Silence. Then Sir Edward said, and if the crown tries to silence you. Eliza looked at the scroll. Then I'll write my own history. A letter for Thomas. That night, back in her tent, Eliza wrote a letter to her brother. She sealed it with wax, using an old coin as a stamp. Dear Thomas, I miss you more than I can say. The city is broken, but I believe we can fix it. I've found something important, something that could make things better, even if it's hard. You'll hear things about Papa, about me. But remember this, truth is the only thing that survives fire. I'll come home soon, and when I do, I'll tell you everything. Love, Eliza. She gave the letter to Agnes to deliver, the girl with fire. In her hands. 2 days later, Eliza stood beside Sir Edward as he presented the scrolls to the city mayor and council. The chamber was full of whispers. Some men turned pale. Others tried to speak over her, but she stood tall, because in her hands wasn't just old paper. It was the story of everyone who had ever been silenced. She thought of the prisoners, of Maggie, of Jonas, of the burned bakeries and forgotten names, and most of all, her mother's words. We don't run from fire. We become its light. Shadows in the smoke. London streets were no longer just broken. They were divided. On one side were the people, the poor, the survivors, the children, like Eliza, who had nothing left but their courage. On the other side stood the rich, the privileged, and the powerful, who feared what the truth might cost them. And in the middle of it all stood Eliza Ward. Her name had begun to spread, whispered from camp to camp, across the rebuilding zones and into the alleys of the ruined city. Some called her the girl who saved the prison, others the child with the fire heart. But among those who wore clean coats and signed papers with feathered pens, she was called something else, the girl who knows too much. Eyes everywhere, started with whispers behind her. Then she noticed the same man standing at the bakery ruins twice in one day. Then a woman with a red shawl passed her 3 times during her errands, always looking away when Eliza turned. Eliza told Sir Edward, but he only nodded grimly. You've stirred the quiet ones, he said, the ones who ruled before the fire and hoped the fire would silence every record of their sins. But the scrolls are safe, Eliza said. They were delivered. Some were, he said softly, but not all. Some are still missing. Eliza's heart dropped. Then someone might still try to destroy them, or destroy you, he said. That night Sir Edward sent Jonas to stand guard by Eliza's tent. He handed her a dagger, small, worn, but sharp. I don't want to use it. Eliza said, I hope you never have to, he replied, but hope alone couldn't keep her safe anymore. The mysterious stranger 3 days later, while walking alone through the eastern ruins to deliver fresh ink and parchment to the city scribes. Eliza was cornered. That it happened fast. 2 men, dressed like workers, stepped out from behind a crumbling archway. One grabbed her wrist, the other covered her mouth. Quiet, girl, one hissed. We don't want to hurt you. Just take a little walk. She kicked and bit, but they were strong. They dragged her into an alley near a collapsed tavern. Eliza screamed into the man's hand, panic blinding her. And then a whistle, sharp, high like a blade through the fog. The man holding her stiffened. A shadow dropped from the rooftop above them like smoke, fast, silent, and fierce. In seconds, one man was on the ground, groaning. The other ran. The figure turned to Eliza. A man maybe 25, lean and cloaked in black. He had sharp features, long fingers, and a jagged scar beneath his left ear. He looked at her with strange recognition. "You're her," he said. She took a step back. "Who are you?" "My name is Gareth," he said, "and I'm here because of your father." The truth he carried. They sat beside the remains of a fountain, now filled with ash and rainwater. Gareth gave her dried figs and a piece of cloth for her scraped knees. "How do you know my father?" Eliza asked. "I didn't know him well," Gareth replied, "but I worked with him before the fire." She blinked. "He was a dock worker." Gareth shook his head slowly. "That's what he told you, but your father was more than a laborer. He was a messenger like you, a secret one. He carried papers between guilds, whisperers, and rebel printers. Your father risked everything to protect the names of the innocent. He hid the scrolls that exposed corruption in the Crown's own courts." Eliza's heart thundered. "You mean he was part of the underground?" "He was one of the last," Gareth said, "until they caught wind. The fire gave the perfect cover for silencing people like him, so he ran." Eliza's mind spun. Her father, the quiet man who hugged her after nightmares, was a secret courier for the truth. "But why did he leave us?" she asked. Gareth looked down. "To draw them away from you. A new target back at the council tent." Sir Edward listened carefully to everything Gareth said. "If this is true," he said, "then Eliza's father might still be alive." "He is," Gareth said, "but he's in hiding. And now that Eliza's name is known, they'll use her to draw him out." "We have to move her," Jonas said firmly. But Eliza stood up. "No," they all turned. "I'm not hiding," she said. "If they want to find me, let them. I want answers. I want to find him." Sir Edward nodded slowly. "Then we prepare." The signal that night, a flare was seen from the roof of the old cloth hall, a blue flame, burning fast. It was a signal one only the underground would understand. A call for truth-bearers to return. Elisa lit it herself, standing tall against the wind. If her father saw it, if he was watching, he'd know she was ready. That same hour, letters were sent to the hidden scribes, to the Printers' Guild, to every camp elder, and as the fire burned high in the ruined sky, Eliza whispered to the night, "Come for me if you must, but I will not fall quietly, not while truth still lives."